Police arrested a man in his 40s for abducting and imprisoning a child in a rundown warehouse for 12 years. The news spread everywhere. As the kidnapper was taken to prison, reporters bombarded him with questions. Meanwhile, as the lock on the warehouse was broken, inside, countless books lay scattered, and a boy sat reading them. Then, two men contacted their captain, informing him that they had found the boy, and judging by the severe injuries on his body, he had endured years of abuse. Somewhere in a hospital, a doctor was speaking to Shin Woo-jin, an 18-year-old, stating that he suffered from a nutritional imbalance and inflammation in his external wounds. Another doctor reflected on how such a beautiful child had been imprisoned and forced into labor for 12 years. The doctor then mentioned that he had hearing loss. She let out a sigh, jotted something down on her notepad, and showed him a note asking for his name and if he could say it out loud. As he silently observed them, she urged him to respond quickly. Finally, he replied that he was a son of a bitch, leaving everyone stunned by his words. He remembers when, under the bright sunlight, his entire body was drenched in sweat as he plowed the earth while a man rested in the shade of a tree. When a basket full of rice was tossed, he devoured it as if it were his last meal. He was in that warehouse when the man shouted "the son of a bitch" and slammed the heavy metal door shut in the freezing winter. He shivered from the biting cold while a cockroach crawled over a book nearby, and he swiftly grabbed it as the snow kept falling outside. In the present time, the doctors were questioning how much brainwashing he had endured to refer to himself that way. Seeing the countless scars covering his body, they wondered what kind of torment he must have endured all this time. They declared those bastards deserved to be executed. Thinking it was at least somewhat fortunate, she touched him, but he flinched in surprise. She assured him that the test results weren't as bad as they had feared, that it was okay now, and that he could sleep as much as he wanted. She told him she would be right back, and another doctor asked if he should handle it. She refused, saying she wanted to take care of it herself. As she closed the hospital room door, she saw a swarm of reporters trying to push their way in while the guards struggled to hold them back. They bombarded the guards with questions about the patient's condition and his family. Frustrated by their relentless shouting and questioning, she snapped, demanding to know if other people's misfortune was their source of happiness. The guard hesitated as she furiously questioned how they had gotten in and whether he had checked their ID badges. As she threatened to report them all, the reporters, realizing they were in the wrong place, decided to leave and head to the scene. On the other side, Woo-jin was lying unconscious on his hospital bed. As he slowly opened his eyes, a fluorescent light glowed from the ceiling, and he felt something attached to his arm. Lifting it, he saw an IV tube connected to him. Across from his hospital room, someone was texting on his phone. That man noticed Woo-jin looking at him and casually said that he had been kidnapped, and that life sure was unpredictable for him too. But Woo-jin didn't respond, making the man assume he couldn't hear well. Internally, he foresaw that Woo-jin's life was only going to get harder from here. Woo-jin examines the man's hospital card, which lists his name as Kim Nam-soon, age 57, diagnosed with an open femur fracture. Woo-jin estimates his height to be around 167 centimeters, weighed approximately 60 kilograms, and notes that he is left-handed with rough, dry hands, indicating frequent dehydration. As Nam-soon scrolls through his phone, Woo-jin deduces that the absence of watch marks or rings suggests he has no interest in accessories, performs manual labor, and is unmarried. Taking all this into account, Woo-jin realizes Nam-soon had fallen from a low rooftop while plastering. The brain of the left-handed Kim Nam-soon, recognizing the fall, instinctively directed his left foot to touch the ground first. The femur, unable to absorb the kinetic energy from the impact, fractured and protruded outward. Woo-jin envisions the scene where the man screams in pain before collapsing unconscious as others rush to his aid, and he determines that the most suitable first aid for the situation is treating an open femur fracture. Woo-jin snaps out of his thoughts at the sound of a noise and notices the doctor closing the door. She has brought some food and asks if he slept well. Humming a tune, she walks towards him and adjusts the hospital table in front of him before asking if he is hungry. She advises him to eat with a fork and spoon, assuming they would be easier for Woo-jin. Woo-jin quietly observes her and thinks. The outer corners of her eyes droop, forming crow's feet. Her cheek muscles tighten and lift, and both corners of her mouth rise symmetrically. Taking all these details into account, he recognizes it as a genuine, supportive smile. Clear evidence that she is not a threat. She places a spoon in his hand, assuring him that he can eat comfortably now and no one will say anything. Woo-jin silently observes the food she brought, swallowing his saliva. She urges him to go ahead, saying, hospital food might not taste great, but eat plenty. Without hesitation, Woo-jin rapidly eats using only his bare hands, astonishing everyone in the room. The doctor tells him to slow down, warning that he might get indigestion, but he keeps eating as she watches in disbelief. He He finishes his meal by picking up the last grain of rice from the bowl and placing it in his mouth. The doctor covers her mouth in shock, wondering just how miserably he has been living. A phone call rings in her pocket, and as she answers, she is informed that Shin Woo-jin's family has arrived. She quickly goes to Woo-jin and tells him that his mom and dad are here, but he is completely confused by her words. Assuring him, she says that's right and asks if she should bring them in soon. Before he can respond, she swiftly takes the food tray and hurries out, closing the door behind her. Woo-jin glances at the clock on the wall, wondering how long it will take for his mom and dad to arrive. He starts counting every second and every minute in his head. After 1 minute and 22 seconds, someone says they will let him hear. Woo-jin becomes confused as countless words flood his mind. He keeps his eyes on the clock and starts focusing on the sound of approaching footsteps from two shadows outside. Watching silently, he sees a man step forward. Eagerly waiting for their arrival, he listens as they mention that the patient's stability is their top priority, so Woo-jin doesn't get startled. He patiently waits as they finally decide to enter. As the door opens before his eyes, he sees a man and a woman standing outside with the doctor. They call out his name with deep emotion, but he is bewildered by their behavior. Suddenly, they rush toward him, both calling his name joyfully. They embrace him tightly, crying as they apologize. Completely confused, Woo-jin pushes them away. Shocked, they ask him what's wrong. He clutches his head in intense pain, struggling to make sense of what is happening. Sometime later in a lively town, someone was talking to her mom. It was a girl telling her she had tidied up the house. She was quietly looking at her phone, wondering if it would be awkward that her biological brother was coming home. She remembered when they had gone to meet him, his manner of speaking and behavior seemed really unusual, and she had no memories of her brother since she was little. Watching the news on her phone, she saw the warehouse where her brother had been rescued. She thought about how he had been confined there for 12 years and wondered if she would have ended up like him if it were her. She noted that, fortunately, it didn't seem to be hearing loss but rather psychological factors. Still, that was a relief. She was startled when the doorbell rang. She quickly rushed to the front door, where her mom called her Bomi, saying she had brought her brother home. Her mom assumes he must be starving and decides to make dinner immediately, while her dad encourages Woo-jin to step inside. Woo-jin nods and enters as his dad closes the door with a big smile. He scans the house, taking everything in. His sister lets out an awkward laugh, welcoming him, but Woo-jin doesn't respond and continues looking around, making the moment even more uncomfortable for her. As he observes the house, his gaze lands on her childhood photos. His dad assumes Woo-jin must feel uneasy being home after so long and gestures toward his room, asking if he remembers it. Woo-jin nods. His sister feels uneasy when their dad asks if he wants to check out his room and spend time with Bomi. Their mom insists that she show him the room and try to connect with him. She tries to object, insisting she will help prepare dinner instead. Her mom tells her that spending time with her brother is more helpful than arguing. As his mom begins chopping vegetables and cooking, Woo-jin sits in his room with his sister. For Bomi, the situation feels unbearably awkward. Woo-jin glances at the bed, noticing a window nearby with a PC and a chair next to it. He realizes this is his room. His sister nervously calls him brother. As he turns to look at her, she is taken aback. Upon observing his face closely, she regretfully realizes he is even more handsome than when she last saw him at the hospital. She decides to teach him how to use a smartphone. She shows him how to turn it on, then begins entering their mom's, dad's, and her own number, demonstrating the process to him. She deletes her number and tells him to try saving it himself. He responds that he understands. Stunned by his reply, she asks him to confirm if he really meant it. Then, she insists that he doesn't need to use formal speech with his younger sister. Woo-jin innocently agrees. Moved by his innocence and quiet observance, she becomes emotional. Then she hands him the powered-off phone, telling him he needs to turn it on first. As Woo-jin presses the power button, he is fascinated by the bright glow of the screen. She points to the new contact option and says she will give him her number. As she begins reciting it, he quickly types it into his phone. Surprised, she wonders if this is really his first time using a phone, as his fingers seem even faster than hers. After Woo-jin finishes saving the contact, he asks if he did it correctly and if he should try again. She reassures him, saying that's right brother seems really smart and thinks to herself that he is learning incredibly fast. This time, she decides to teach him how to search the internet, which leaves him puzzled. She explains that in this box, he can type anything he wants to know. He watches intently as she demonstrates how to tap the magnifying glass icon. When she asks if he wants to try, he nods. Curious, he types the word family into the search bar. The internet shows a definition along with images illustrating what a family is. He glances at Bomi, calling her his sister and family, She turns back in surprise and smiling at him, reassuring him that's right. Woo-jin suddenly catches a scent in the air, while Bomi, still confused, watches him and wipes her tears. He wondered if the scent was perfume, and recalled that its origins date back around 5,000 years, used in religious ceremonies and as a way to communicate with gods. Modern perfumes are crafted from a blend of various fragrances and solvents, meant to attract others or leave an impression. Suddenly, he stands up, saying "good smell perfume," leaving Bomi puzzled by his words. As he begins walking out of the room, Bomi asks where he is going, but he doesn't respond and keeps moving forward. He steps out of his room, where his parents are cooking, and is captivated by the rich aroma. Noticing the food arranged on the table, he realizes it wasn't perfume. Woo-jin looks down, swallowing hard as he wonders if all of this is really food. Seeing him come out at the perfect moment, his mom assumes he must be hungry and tells him to sit down. As Bomi steps out, she notices that Dad has made kimchi stew. Her mom urges her to sit down as well. They all gather for dinner, with Woo-jin's mom and dad feeding him like a child. As he eats, the others laugh joyfully. On the other side, someone stated that his family had died 5 years ago and asked if he had nothing to say about it. First, his wife, then his mother, his sister-in-law had succumbed to poisonous herbs, and even 2 close neighbors had passed away. That man insists he wasn't the one. The other man shouts, pointing to the series of deaths around him and accusing him of being responsible. But he keeps denying it, insisting he truly didn't do it. The other man warns him for being uncooperative. In response, he calls him detective and claims that bastard might be the real killer. Confused, the detective demands an explanation. Enraged, the man rises, shouting about the son of a bitch he fed and sheltered, accusing him of murdering them all. Another man enters, ordering him to sit down. The detective also stands, demanding how he dares to yell. That man insists they have no idea what kind of bastard he is. Then we see Woo-jin when he was imprisoned, reading a book about human anatomy, as thunder rumbles outside. His hair is unkempt, but he remains focused on the pages. On the other side, Woo-jin is in his room, staring at his phone and tapping on an icon, recalling Bomi's suggestion that this is what a lot of people watch. He is astonished to see countless videos on the platform. There, he watches a vlog of a man introducing himself. Woo-jin listens intently and rewinds the video to the beginning. As the man introduces himself, Woo-jin mimics his style, saying hello family and everyone. Below, a food video catches his attention, and he is captivated by the title tteokbokki mukbang. There, a girl introduces herself, saying she is going to try the tteokbokki, which she has been craving for a week. Woo-jin intently watches her as she eats, his mouth watering as he also craves to eat it. Suddenly someone starts knocking on his door. It was Bomi asking what he was doing, and if she could come in. Woo-jin opens the door for a smiling Bomi and asks if she called him and needed something. He suggests cleaning and asks what kind of work he should do. She quickly refuses, saying he doesn't have to do that. She assures him that she just wants to go get some ice cream. But Woo-jin is puzzled by the word ice cream. As she realizes he has never had it, she describes it as cool and really delicious. She leads Woo-jin outside. Her mom insists they have nowhere else to be, and her dad tells Bomi to hold his brother's hand tightly. They both reassure them that they will be right back. They step out of the house onto the street and walk for a while. Woo-jin is mesmerized by the brightly lit stores illuminating the night. As they enter the store, the owner greets them warmly. Woo-jin is even more astonished by the sight of delicious food everywhere. Bomi calls him over and tells him to choose anything he likes from the fridge packed with ice cream. He continues staring at the ice cream in awe. Noticing his hesitation, Bomi asks if he needs help. After thinking for a moment beside the drooling Woo-jin, she picks out an ice cream cone and hands it to him, saying, "This is delicious." As they head out, Bomi wonders if she should give Woo-jin money and let him try paying. She decides to take it slow and buys the ice cream for Woo-jin, telling the shop owner she would like to pay. They walk out, thanking the owner, who wishes them a nice day. Nearby, a girl eating snacks urges her friend to look over. As they glance over, asking what it is, they spot Woo-jin with his sister struggling to open his ice cream. They are stunned by how handsome he is. One of them nudges her friend to ask for his number, but they hesitate, feeling too embarrassed. Bomi smirks as they mistake her for his girlfriend. Bomi offers to open it for him, and he gladly accepts, thanking her. She assures him that he doesn't need to thank his sister. Handing him the unwrapped ice cream, she urges him to try it as drool forms at the corner of his mouth. Grinning, she says it's super cool and sweet. He takes a small bite of the ice cream and slowly begins to taste it. As the flavor spreads across his tongue, his eyes widen in shock. Bomi, puzzled by his sudden reaction, asks if it tastes odd or is too cold, regretting that she might have chosen the wrong thing. She assures him if it tastes weird, he doesn't have to force himself to eat it. Woo-jin exclaims in delight it's delicious as he becomes overwhelmed with tears. He starts licking the ice cream, and Bomi wonders where he learned to say that. As Woo-jin eagerly eats his ice cream, Bomi, glancing back at the surprised girls, tells him to eat slowly. Woo-jin, like a child, eagerly eats his ice cream. Bomi laughs at his behavior and takes out her phone, asking if they should take a picture. He mumbles something while eating. Then she snaps a few photos on her phone while enjoying ice cream with her brother. While looking through the pictures, she decides to head home and suggests they eat as they walk. Sometime later, as they stroll down the street, Bomi sends a picture to her friends with the caption, "Ice cream with my brother today." They comment that he looks like a puppy and playfully joke about wishing they were the ice cream. As Bomi was absorbed in her phone, Woo-jin suddenly stopped, but she kept walking ahead without noticing. That's when Woo-jin spotted a man trailing them, his face partially hidden as he watched Bomi from a corner. Unaware of his presence, she kept walking, while the man's gaze drifted over her legs before lingering on her butt and the area around her neck. He looked like a starving hyena eyeing its prey. Woo-jin silently observed him, studying every detail from his appearance to his face, and remembered that when they returned home, the family didn't recognize him. That's when he realized the man was a complete stranger who didn't belong in this neighborhood. As Woo-jin stands there watching the stalker, the man notices Woo-jin staring at him and quickly turns away, hiding his face before walking off. Woo-jin begins carefully examining his back, noticing his sweat-soaked armpits and the creases on the knees of his pants. He realizes the man has pedal marks, but they aren't as wide as those from a bicycle. They're from a motorcycle. There's nowhere nearby where mud would stick to his soles, meaning he came from another area, and Woo-jin takes note of every other subtle detail. With a grim expression, he calls out to Bomi, who turns around and asks why he's just standing there. She scans her surroundings and asks if something is wrong. Woo-jin instructs her to just head inside first. She swiftly grabs his arm, insisting that it's far too late at night. Besides, she argues that if she goes in alone, Mom will scold her. She pulls him along, thinking it's too risky to leave Woo-jin alone. After they arrive home safely, sometime later in Woo-jin's room, he watches the rain pour down as someone assures him they will protect his family and warns him to stay out of it. Woo-jin insists that they're his family too. The voice scoffs, saying he's reporting it to the police, then ridicules Woo-jin, asking if that's really how he intends to protect them before calling him a fool. Woo-jin says there are many ways and calls him a monster who can't adapt to this world. His old self responds, claiming he did what was necessary to survive and assuming that someone as soft-hearted as him would have died long ago. Woo-jin insists he could have made it on his own and that his existence has no place in this world. As the rain grew heavier outside, Woo-jin stood by the window, his old self demanding to know what he's even doing and if there's anything he truly excels at more than him. Woo-jin insisted he is the master of his body and that his old self is just another persona he created. But his old self laughed, claiming the opposite, that this body belongs to him. Woo-jin sees worry and anxiety as his sustenance, something that always consumes him when they appear. But now he can control him, and if he summons him from his subconscious, he can fully tap into his knowledge. A fierce beast with sharp fangs. But if Woo-jin uses him well, he can unleash his full potential today. His old self gradually takes control of his entire body, rolling his shoulders to loosen the tension. Outside, in the dim, rain-soaked night, the stalker stands with an umbrella. A sinister smile creeps across Woo-jin's old self as he spots him. Then he slowly approaches the door, silently unlocks it, and carefully pushes it open without making a sound. Step by step, he advances toward the front entrance. Woo-jin descends the stairs as the rain keeps pouring. He opens the front gate of their house and steps in front of the stalker, who just stands there like an ordinary passerby minding his own business. As Woo-jin starts walking toward the same road he had been standing on, the stalker quickly lowers his head, trying to slip away. As the stalker passes Woo-jin, Woo-jin halts, raising his hand slightly to feel the rain as he is completely drenched in it, and says, "Gift of all things, even concealing human presence can be called rain." He looks back at the stalker and remarks, so meticulous in preparation, waiting for a day like this. The stalker, utterly baffled, just looks back at him. Woo-jin approaches him, demanding what he means and to not be dull. The stalker asks Woo-jin who he is while gripping his umbrella firmly in his left hand. Woo-jin says it stings that he knows him so well, mentioning that the stalker had jjajangmyeon for lunch and works as a delivery rider, tirelessly navigating his motorcycle over hills. The stalker is completely taken aback by how much Woo-jin knows about him. Woo-jin calls out to the lowlife lurking around their villa, noticing the cat hair on his sleeve, and asks if he killed a stray cat for practice, leaving the stalker even more horrified and confused. The stalker starts demanding to know who Woo-jin really is. Woo-jin brushes his front hair in irritation and asks if he is talking to him. Suddenly, Woo-jin strikes the stalker, sending him flying to the ground. The speechless stalker looks up at Woo-jin in shock. His fear deepens as Woo-jin rips his shirt apart, revealing countless scars across his body. As the stalker stares at them, terror grips him. Woo-jin crouches down and warns him to never show his face again. Woo-jin vows that if he does, he will etch those wounds into his body. The stalker instinctively retreats in fear. Woo-jin commands that if he understands, he shouldn't crawl like a worm, just disappear quickly. The frightened stalker immediately dashes away, leaving Woo-jin standing alone in the relentless downpour. He gazes up at the streetlight, thinking the sound of the rain is pleasant, and gradually, a smile spreads across his face. The next day, Woo-jin was enjoying a meal with his family at a restaurant. After 2 days, he was with his mom eating the famous tteokbokki as she shared its rich history. Then 3 days later, Woo-jin was with his sister watching a movie and remarking that the combination of corn and caramel was perfect. And after 4 days, he was in his room studying with his sister. The question notebook lies open before him. He scans the words on the page and swiftly marks the correct answers with his pen, leaving his sister astonished by his speed as he rapidly selects the right ones. Bomi assumes he is mindlessly marking the questions and scolds him, insisting that he should go through all the questions before answering. But Woo-jin assures her that he has read them all. While Woo-jin innocently hands her his notebook, puzzled Bomi wonders how he learned to speak like that and regrets introducing him to YouTube. Looking at the notebook, she assumes he must have just guessed and decides she still needs to teach him how to grade it. Turning the page of the notebook, she says, "Then shall we grade it together?" And Woo-jin agrees. She goes through his answers one by one and is shocked, feeling confused because they are all correct. She asks her brother to confirm if he truly read and solved all of them. He agrees and asks her if he did well. She swaps the notebook for a more difficult one and asks if he wants to try this one too. Woo-jin takes the notebook from her and agrees. In just a few seconds, he marks all the correct answers. Embarrassed, Bomi quickly snatches the notebook from his hands. Upon checking it, she exclaims that he is like a genius. Woo-jin responds that he is not a genius and simply wants to be an ordinary person. When she questions his choice, Woo-jin explains that becoming ordinary might be difficult, but it is what he wants. Bomi looks at him and imagines how, despite being younger than her, Woo-jin had endured abuse at the hands of his kidnapper, was forced into slavery, made to clean his toilet, and suffered through the freezing cold with nothing to keep himself warm. She watches the innocent Woo-jin standing on his chair and begins to cry, saying he has been through so much. Woo-jin examines every detail of her face and determines that her emotions are genuine. She flinches as he places his hand on her head and softly calls her name, urging her not to be sad. He swiftly moves to his desk, searching for something, and starts writing in his notepad while a bewildered Bomi asks what he is doing. Woo-jin simply attempts to hand her the notebook as she questions if he wrote something, but her eyes widen in astonishment as she glances down at the words he had written for her. Woo-jin informs Bomi on the note to avoid feeling sad. As her body temperature drops, her immune system may weaken. The emotion of sadness impacts her tongue and can contribute to weight gain and cardiovascular disease. It also influences cortisol hormones, raising stress levels and disturbing sleep quality. Sadness stimulates the hippocampus, making the brain require more energy, which can leave her feeling exhausted. The emotion of sadness lowers serotonin levels, potentially leading to depression and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Surprised, Bomi asks him how he knows all this. Woo-jin sits beside her and replies that he has read many books. Suddenly, Woo-jin rushes to the kitchen as their mom calls them, urging them to come eat, mentioning that the side dishes include meat, leaving behind stunned Bomi by his knowledge of such things. Sometime later at night, Woo-jin was watching food YouTube videos while resting on his bed, assuming it must be incredibly tasty. As he scrolled through the videos, slowly watching them one by one, his eyes fell on a video of a high school girl preparing to eat 10 servings of malatang. He didn't know what that was, so he clicked on the video. Woo-jin starts watching as she introduces herself, then suddenly glances upward, pointing her finger to her lips. When she picks up some noodles with her chopsticks, she bites her lips before eating them. Woo-jin begins watching more closely as she starts blushing while eating, covering her mouth and looking upward, saying it's extremely spicy but still delicious. Woo-jin grows more confused as she says that. Then she drops some noodles on the table saying it's hot. She smiles, closing her eyes, and gives a thumbs up while exclaiming, "The texture is no joke." While talking, she pushes the bowl aside, revealing a noodle shaped like an S. Woo-jin quickly realizes something and immediately looks up her YouTube channel. He finds numerous videos of her eating different kinds of food. As he scrolls through them, he begins watching closely, carefully analyzing each one. He notices her cooking while grasping her necklace, and he can clearly see the sorrow on her face. Then, as she speaks, she lets her hair down and sets her ribbon on the table, forming an O shape. Woo-jin then checks another one of her videos, where she was eating chicken and decided to mix it with rice. Woo-jin realizes she resembles someone familiar to him. He pictures himself behaving the same way after seeing it and wonders, would that truly be normal? Woo-jin recalls when his dad asked him what he wants to be in the future. His mom wonders why his dad is bringing it up so soon. She comforts Woo-jin, saying it's okay if he doesn't have any plans and telling him to just stay healthy and happy for a long time. Woo-jin replied that he wants to be an ordinary office worker. They assure him that being an office worker is good too, and that he can pursue whatever he wants. The next day in a Korean police station, someone was heading toward its entrance. It was our Woo-jin believing reporting is a common thing. Inside the police station, someone keeps insisting that he truly didn't do it. But the detective shows him some photos, telling him it's all recorded on CCTV. The man still insists that he doesn't wear that type of hat, which appears in the photo. The detective then tells him there's even a witness, and the man asks for the witness's identity. While that man was insisting, Woo-jin arrives, calling out to Detective Kim Tae-hyun. Tae-hyun watches him for a moment before realizing in surprise that it's Woo-jin, who has become so handsome that he's barely recognizable. Tae-hyun remembers the time they rescued him and his condition, as Tae-hyun was the one who guided him into the police car. He had seen how terrified Woo-jin was of every movement when he tried to fasten his seatbelt, and how he had to reassure him, promising that he would take responsibility and make sure he got home safely. Tae-hyun asks if he has been in good health, and Woo-jin responds that he has been doing well thanks to him. Tae-hyun exclaims in surprise that he's even speaking fluently now. He then orders one of his colleagues, Jikyol, to escort the man to the holding cell. As Jikyol leads him away, the man desperately insists on his innocence. Woo-jin questions whether this situation has now become the usual procedure for culprits. He remarks that when culprits are caught, they always deny it initially. Tae-hyun laughs and agrees with him, saying that when they're caught, they always deny it, as if following a script. He asks Woo-jin how he found his way here, joking if he came because he missed him. Woo-jin takes out his phone and says he has something to show him. Tae-hyun assumes Woo-jin wants something to drink and tells him to sit so they can talk outside. While opening the YouTube channel of that girl, Woo-jin reassures him it's fine and asks him to check this out. Tae-hyun watches the video and asks Woo-jin if he started a YouTube channel. Woo-jin keeps playing the video, explaining that it's someone who is in a similar situation as him. Woo-jin explains that when her eyes shift up and to the right while her fingers move towards her lips, it indicates nervousness or anxiety. He adds that biting the lips, as if chewing on them, is another sign of discomfort. However, he notes that feeling anxious in front of appetizing food is unusual, so he suggests she might be concerned about its taste. He further argues that when her eyes shift up and to the right again, it signals dishonesty, as her words and expressions don't align. Woo-jin notices that while she is eating, her hunched shoulders imply she feels uneasy or threatened. He also adds that when her eyes shift up and to the left, it indicates she is retrieving memories rather than being deceptive. However, he points out that her unconscious attempt to cover her mouth suggests she is concealing something. Woo-jin points out that while she is boiling water, touching or playing with her necklace is a common self-soothing behavior that helps alleviate stress and restore emotional balance. Tae-hyun asks Woo-jin if she is trying to signal for help. To confirm it, Woo-jin rewinds the video and shows him the moment she makes the SOS gesture. Woo-jin urges him to focus on her subtle expressions and involuntary movements, insisting it's too intentional to be a coincidence. Woo-jin suspects she is being held captive, just like he was before, and starts recalling every expression and signal she used to plead for help. Still, Tae-hyun couldn't confirm that she was being held captive, so Woo-jin explains that at first, it was just a faint strand of hair, then a hair tie, then a piece of cotton, and says that they're steadily growing bolder. Tae-hyun realizes Woo-jin is saying the victim is likely in their early 20s. The YouTuber may not have a family, but may have grown up in a poor environment, and the perpetrators aren't just one person but a group. Tae-hyun pictures the girl cornered and held captive. He asks Woo-jin if he is familiar with her, but Woo-jin replies that he isn't, surprising Tae-hyun. Woo-jin then explains that he was also imprisoned for a long time, so he understands the behavior of captive people well. Woo-jin calls him detective and asks if he believes coincidences can become truth when they pile up. Woo-jin deduces that the outfit he is wearing was chosen by his mom. Woo-jin's clothes were also chosen by his mom. Tae-hyun grows confused and asks how he knows that. Woo-jin acknowledges that's one coincidence with what he just mentioned and speculates that the culprit likely plays violin or viola as a hobby, not professionally but with serious dedication. Tae-hyun becomes even more perplexed, and Woo-jin informs him that would be the second coincidence. Tae-hyun chuckles and guesses that Woo-jin wants to be a profiler or something. Woo-jin denies it, stating that he just wants to be an ordinary office worker and only came to file a report. Woo-jin explains that he is trying to persuade him with logic and gestures toward the suspect who just entered the holding cell, requesting Taehyun to ask him once what his hobby is. Woo-jin guarantees that if he is wrong after Taehyun asks, he can punish him for interfering with official duties. Taehyun dismisses the idea, saying they do have a connection, so he can ask. He then walks off, telling Woo-jin to wait a moment. Woo-jin watches him walk away, closing the door before him. As Taehyun moves down the corridor, he questions what he is doing at the moment, but admits that the kid speaks well. Taehyun then carefully inspects his shirt and uneasily wonders how Woo-jin really knew. Taehyun calls out to the man locked behind the cell and asks if he happens to play the violin or viola. The man acknowledges that it is his hobby, leaving Taehyun stunned and confused. The man questions if he investigated that thoroughly and wonders if he even searched his house as Taehyun silently watches him. Taehyun suspects Woo-jin might have some kind of ability. When that man persistently claimed he was innocent and repeatedly inquired about the eyewitness, Woo-jin was attentively observing his every move. As that man kept arguing with Taehyun, Woo-jin was analyzing the structure of his face and the intricate details of his hands. Then he deduced that the man played the violin or viola. Then Taehyun comes back searching for Woo-jin. He asks Jikyol, where did that kid who was here go? Jikyol replies that he doesn't know. Taehyun notices a note near some pictures. As he picks up the sheet of paper, he begins reading about the third coincidence, which reveals that the high school mukbang girl is desperate now, ending with Woo-jin's phone number. He calls out to Jikyol, urging him to search YouTube for high school mukbang immediately. Sometime later at the bus stop, Woo-jin patiently waits for the bus. As the bus slows to a stop in front of him, he recalls when his mom gave him his new transit card. Walking toward the entrance of the bus, Woo-jin thinks this is the second time he is a student. He hops on, swipes his card to pay, and heads to the back seats, sitting by the window. As he gazes outside, he then remembers someone drinking. It was his father and another man, while Woo-jin was eating chicken with some Coke. That man asks Woo-jin if he wants to be an office worker. Woo-jin agrees, saying he wants to be a regular office worker, like the ones at his workplace, and calls him uncle. His dad thinks that's not just any ordinary company. His uncle laughs and says he heard Woo-jin is exceptional at studying and solves problems in seconds. He reassures him it would be ordinary for Woo-jin. Woo-jin requests if he could take a look around. His uncle agrees and asks when he'd like to come. While on the bus, Woo-jin remembers that the date he promised his uncle is today. He glances at the notice board and realizes there are 4 stops left until his destination. He roughly estimates how many minutes and seconds it will take to arrive. As he enters the city, his bus stops in front of the company where his uncle works. Woo-jin calls his uncle, who assures him he will be down soon. The building was Shin Woo-jin General Trading. Woo-jin thinks it's as tall as expected from a major corporation. As people go about their daily routines, he observes them closely and sees them as ordinary individuals. Woo-jin reflects on his dream of living a simple, ordinary life like theirs. His uncle arrives and questions Woo-jin about waiting outside instead of in the lobby. Woo-jin expresses his gratitude for the opportunity to visit. His uncle assures him it's nothing, then leads him through the company gate. As they walk through the building, his uncle asks if he is impressed, and Woo-jin nods in agreement. His uncle explains that there's a cafeteria in the basement and that they have several branch offices nationwide. Woo-jin quietly recites the name of each branch. His uncle asks if he researched all that before coming, and Woo-jin confirms. He says he thought he needed to know a lot to live an ordinary life, and believes that living ordinarily is not easy. His uncle remarks that he's sharp and asks if they should go up. He then swipes his card on the machine ahead of Woo-jin. His uncle was showing him the 5 elevators when a girl noticed them and asked if he was the manager's son. He addressed her as Hiram and clarified that Woo-jin was not his son but his nephew, explaining that he had something to deliver. She glances at Woo-jin and remarks that she can see it, while Woo-jin silently meets her gaze. They both simultaneously ask each other if he or she is in high school. Hiram looks puzzled by his question and asks if it isn't obvious from the uniform that she is in high school. As the elevator doors open, his uncle quickly ushers him inside and tells Hiram he'll see her later. As the door starts to close, he tells Hiram to enjoy her lunch. He lets out a sigh as the elevator ascends. Upon reaching the 7th floor, his uncle leads the surprised Woo-jin into their workplace, where numerous employees are engrossed in their projects. He walks through the bustling office, observing workers absorbed in their tasks, some being scolded by their bosses, while others appear exhausted from their demanding assignments. His uncle seats him in a chair and asks if he feels like an office worker sitting there. Woo-jin shakes his head and replies that he will work hard to truly become one. Then a man calls his uncle, the manager, informing him that the Saudi contract has been cancelled. He immediately shouts, ordering him to notify everyone to gather in the conference room immediately. His uncle escorts Woo-jin back, mentioning that he had planned to eat with him in the cafeteria, but suddenly has urgent business to attend to. Woo-jin reassures him that it's fine since he has already seen a lot. Woo-jin enters the lift descending to the first floor. Coincidentally, Woo-jin and Hiram step out of the lift at the same time. Hiram notices him coming out and exclaims she saw him again. Woo-jin observes her behavior and thinks this is not a place for a high school student to be. He notes that she remains unfazed when dealing with adults, maintaining a calm tone and composed expression. As Woo-jin tries to leave, she moves forward, obstructing his path, and asks if he received what the manager relayed. Woo-jin observes that she walks with assured strides, asserting control over the space as if it were her own territory by blocking his way. Judging from her actions, Woo-jin deduces that she is likely associated with a high-ranking company executive and figures it wouldn't hurt to get acquainted with her. He assures her that he got it and says goodbye, leaving her puzzled as he starts walking away. She quickly calls out to him, and Woo-jin turns back, asking what. She questions whether it isn't class time right now and if he is skipping. He responds that he doesn't attend school, confusing her even more. As Woo-jin attempts to leave, he reminds her that he already said he doesn't go to school, but she again stops him. Hiram remarks that she hates wasting time on things that offer her no benefit, just like this moment, and doesn't see any value in talking to him. She is taken aback when Woo-jin casually tells her he would actually prefer if she stopped talking to him. Woo-jin deduces that by dismissing and undermining others, people attempt to validate their own worth. He mentally challenges her to reveal who she thinks she is. Hiram narrows her eyes at Woo-jin and asks, "What if she is the daughter of this company's CEO?" Woo-jin thinks he saw this coming and decides that in moments like this, he should show a reaction. He slightly widens his eyes, parts his lips a bit, and asks, "Really?" Hiram asks, does that change how he perceives her now? Woo-jin silently stands before her as she starts observing his shoes and shirt. He thinks having revealed her identity, she openly scrutinizes him like a superior addressing a subordinate unaware of how rude she's being, and is also able to swiftly regain control of her excited emotions. Hiram asks if he isn't attending school, and Woo-jin confirms. She says that's perfect and remarks that she's bored, asking Woo-jin if he wants to hang out with her today. Woo-jin examines every detail of her face and concludes it is greed. He assumes she sees him as a plaything, but instead, he can exploit that greed to manipulate her like a puppet. She says she hasn't eaten yet and asks Woo-jin if he wants to grab something to eat. He thinks she isn't giving him a choice and responds with sure. Woo-jin assumes that when she grows up, there's a high chance she'll be a sociopath or a narcissist. She says she knows a good place and decides to go there. Woo-jin asks where it is, and she tells him he'll find out when they arrive. Woo-jin thinks she doesn't even share any details about the location and assumes she's the type who expects the world to revolve around her. Sometime later, they are sitting in a fancy restaurant. She comments that since he isn't in school, she asks if he's pursuing a career as an idol or something else. He replies something else. She then asks what he does. He responds with studying and explains he is preparing for the high school equivalency exam. But he asks her why she isn't in school at this hour. As she says she left early because it's that time of the month, Woo-jin carefully examines her expression and suspects she is lying. Woo-jin asks if she means that time, and she confirms it. As Woo-jin says she's referring to the phenomenon where the uterine lining reacts to hormones and is expelled, which stuns her and leaves her flustered. While the waitress asks if they are ready to order, blushing Hiram quietly shoots a glare at Woo-jin. She declares they will both have the S course, while she continues ordering. Woo-jin anticipates that she won't give him a choice and assumes she has a strong urge to assert control over others. Hiram casually asks for his name, and he replies Shin Woo-jin. She remarks that it's not a bad name. Woo-jin observes the surroundings as people eat their dinner and waits quietly. When the waitress arrives with their order, Hiram asks if he is always this quiet, and he confirms it. As the waitress was about to serve them their soup to start, Hiram accidentally touches the waitress's arm while saying this is so boring, which startles her. The waitress quickly apologizes and asks if she scared her, then continues serving as Hiram silently checks her arm. She reassures the waitress it's fine. Woo-jin assumes she is overreacting because nothing happened. Hiram starts tying her hair and says she had already told him it was that time of the month. He believes there's a high chance she's lying. Suddenly, her ribbon falls, and as she bends to pick it up, Woo-jin covers the corner of the table. Confused, she asks what he's doing. He responds that he's protecting her head from injury. She looks up at him and starts to blush. He remarks that something bad must have happened to her. Embarrassed, Hiram denies it and asks what makes him so sure. Sitting in his chair, he simply replies that she looks a bit tired. She tells him to worry about himself since his face is so pale it's almost white, then asks why he doesn't try the food before it gets cold. He agrees, takes a sip of the soup, and is amazed by its flavor. She asks if it's delicious and mentions that the soup here is just as good as the one at K restaurant in Busan. Woo-jin thinks he has caught her like a fish taking the bait. Now to backtrack, he mirrors her words to build rapport and asks who she went to K restaurant with. She says she went with a friend and asks if he knows Kim Yena. He replies that he has no idea who that is. She asks if he really doesn't know the actress Kim Yena. He tells Hiram he's never heard of her. She asks if he's been living under a rock or something. He thinks it's time to bring back old memories, using questions to help relive past experiences and positive emotions. He says she must have loved seeing the ocean. She talks about the fireworks over Gwangan Bridge and describes them as a masterpiece of pure art. Woo-jin thinks her body and brain must be drenched in dopamine, norepinephrine, and other hormones as she recalls the past. He explains that the human brain can't differentiate between reality and imagination, just like how picturing a lemon makes the mouth water. Though she's sitting here, she's speaking excitedly as if she's watching fireworks from a yacht. Just by leading her through past joy and listening, he has become a source of pleasure for her. He asks, "Really?" And she assures him it was hilarious. As they continue talking, the waitress brings their main course. Woo-jin is excited as the meat has finally arrived, and she asks why he doesn't cut it up. She asks if he has ever been on any trips, and he denies it. The waitress brings them the final course, a mango sorbet. She tells him she went to an island called Holbox last year. Woo-jin mutters its location in Quintana Roo on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. She confirms it and portrays the beach there at night, describing the stars in the sky as so dense they resemble an aurora, while the waves glisten as they roll in. She looks confused as Woo-jin suddenly gets up, saying he needs to go study. She asks why so suddenly and then says, "Don't tell her he's one of those people who scrub bathrooms and do that kind of work." Woo-jin starts walking away, saying he has a high school equivalency exam, but Hiram calls out for him to wait a second. Woo-jin looks back as she questions how he can just leave like that and insists he should at least give her his phone number. She makes an excuse, saying that since he hasn't been to Holbox Island, she could help if he ever goes, as she knows the best hotels and restaurants. Woo-jin thinks she's addicted to the hormones that bring her pleasure. He is the one who can trigger them, and she might have attachment issues and weak family bonds. Woo-jin hands her his phone, assuming that if he exploits these weaknesses, he might be able to make everything she has experienced and learned his. She enters his number into her phone and exclaims that he doesn't even have a passcode on it. He takes his phone, thanking her for the meal. She responds with a simple sure as he walks away, then adjusts her ribbon, trying to remember something. Stepping out of the restaurant, she asks Woo-jin where he lives, but he ignores her, staring ahead as she continues calling out to him. Woo-jin is focused on someone who has cornered a man in a narrow alleyway. Hiram steps closer to Woo-jin to see what's wrong, as Woo-jin shields her face with his hand, telling her not to look, and she swiftly retreats. He tells her someone has been stabbed. When she screams asking Woo-jin if he said stabbed, the culprit notices them and flees the crime scene while Woo-jin shields Hiram with his body. Woo-jin focuses his gaze on that man, analyzing his outfit and every single detail which he could see. He starts running while calling to the police number. He watches as the man clutches his wound in agony. Woo-jin presses his hand against it, trying to stop the bleeding, and tells him to hold on a bit longer. He alerts the police about the stabbing and urgently requests assistance, providing the location. Placing 2 fingers on the man's wrist, he checks his pulse, which is rapidly increasing. Woo-jin assumes the cerebellum is raising the heart rate in response to blood loss. Noting the severity of the internal bleeding, Woo-jin asks the man for his blood type. He weakly responds type B. He reports the hemoperitoneum is severe, so an urgent blood transfusion is required, and provides details of the blood type. As they ask him, Woo-jin reiterates the condition of the wounded man. They ask where the man was stabbed. Woo-jin replies in the abdomen. They provide instructions on how to help the wounded man. He states he is already doing everything possible and hopes they will prepare type B blood and send it immediately. Woo-jin quickly glances at Hiram, who is utterly horrified by the situation, and thinks living a normal life is truly difficult. Sometime later the police arrive there, and takes care of the situation while controlling the crowd. Woo-jin was wiping the blood from his hands by a tissue. When the officer calls him student, stating he wants to ask him a few questions about the person he claimed to have seen, he immediately begins describing every detail of that man. While taking out his phone, the officer tells him to hold on. While turning on the recorder, he asks if Woo-jin could start from the beginning again. Hiram quietly observes Woo-jin as he explains the situation to the officer. Woo-jin assumes this is her first time going through this, but her condition creates a perfect environment for him. He pictures her as a baby crawling on the ground. As she gradually stands up, her parents support her, cheering for her small achievement. But suddenly she stumbles. Woo-jin believes that when shock takes over, people either sit down or collapse, unsure of how to react. Her parents gently console her as she cries. Woo-jin decides to comfort Hiram right away, just like a parent would, since at this moment, no one else can take his place. He asks if she was startled and reassures her, saying it's okay now, while also assuming this experience will leave a strong impression, making her think of him. He rests his hand on her shoulder, reassuring her that thankfully, the victim doesn't appear to be seriously injured. Like a child holding on to their mother, he tells her she doesn't need to worry. He says the culprit never even saw their faces, and will most likely be caught soon since there are numerous CCTV cameras around. Sometime later, somewhere in an elegant house, inside a lavish master bedroom, someone had arrived home. The shower was cascading with hot water, as that girl was bathing. It was none other than Hiram, who was reminiscing about the situation she faced with Woo-jin and began recalling his reassuring words. Then a gentle smile formed on her lips. As she relished the warm water, she opened the glass door of the bathroom and stepped out with a towel wrapped around her hair and a shirt draping over half of her body. She slowly walks in her slippers to the dressing room and sits in front of the mirror, adjusting her hair towel. She quietly looks down at her phone, realizing she never had the chance to ask Woo-jin. On the other side in Woo-jin's house, he was on his bed watching some food videos. As he begins to scroll down that video, he sees a video where they were preparing meat sticks. Woo-jin is astonished and resolves to definitely try it someday. Suddenly, Hiram texted him asking if he got home safely. He opens his chat and responds that he is completely fine. She asks what he said. He replies that he is going to sleep now and says goodnight. Woo-jin ignores her and keeps watching the food video. Hiram texts him, saying it's only 10 o'clock and he's already asleep. But Woo-jin ignores her and continues watching the video. The next day, Woo-jin enjoys his meal and gives his mom a double thumbs up for her cooking. Then his dad leaves for work and his sister heads to school. Woo-jin places his notebook in front of him and quickly starts solving the questions. Once he's done, he tosses the notebook aside, looks at his phone, and thinks that keeping it beside him is a golden rule he should apply to everyday life. Suddenly, Hiram starts texting him, but Woo-jin moves on to another notebook and thinks, ignoring messages is just another part of an ordinary routine. He gazes out the window and notices a small sparrow perched on a wire. He considers this a peaceful and ordinary daily life because to him, maintaining ordinariness is challenging, and he has to put in effort to achieve it. Suddenly, an unknown number starts calling Woo-jin. As he answers, the caller introduces themselves as Team Leader Kim Mi-young and explains that they are calling regarding business funds or emergency loans. Woo-jin wonders if he actually won something and remembers a post explaining what to do when receiving voice phishing or loan calls. Woo-jin keeps a straight face and says he needs about 10 billion won, asking if that's possible. They immediately hang up the call. Woo-jin sits down, relieved that he knew how to handle this. But once again, an unknown number calls him. As Woo-jin answers, the caller introduces himself as Officer Sang-chul from the police station. Woo-jin wonders if he won again, and Sang-chul asks if he is Shin Woo-jin, the student who reported the stabbing. Woo-jin confirms it, and Sang-chul says they need his help to come in for a witness statement since the suspect has been caught. Woo-jin steps out of his room and shuts the door. He heads to the front door, quietly starting to close it, but suddenly opens it again and says he'll be back, not late like last time. Woo-jin recalls the time he was kidnapped, thinking of his happy family, and vows to come back on time every day. On the other side, the sky was overcast, and the atmosphere was dim. A man was handcuffed, and someone said they couldn't see his face clearly because of the hat. The other person told him to just focus on the overall impression. It was Taehyun asking Woo-jin if the man seemed like the one from that time. Woo-jin then asked what the suspect was saying now. Taehyun presses a button and asks if he wants to listen to his voice. The sound from the interrogation room begins transmitting to the other room. The man keeps insisting he is innocent and accuses the cops of harassing him. From the mirrored wall of the interrogation room, Woo-jin carefully analyzed the suspect's every detail and movement. The suspect bit his lip, insisting, why would he do something to someone he didn't even know? When they mentioned the blood stains on his hands, he unconsciously covered his mouth. As he kept making excuses, he clenched his teeth in frustration. Taehyun quietly observed Woo-jin. A moment later, he asked what Woo-jin thought after hearing that. As Woo-jin responded that the person was lying. Outside, the rain started to fall. Taehyun asks if he believes it is that guy and Woo-jin agrees. He recalls the man's actions during the interrogation, considering that he chose to freeze by crossing his feet. Woo-jin thinks about the likelihood of him freezing due to psychological pressure, but assumes that if they analyze all his behaviors mathematically and probabilistically, and his nonverbal cues suggest he is frozen in place before a perceived threat, it indicates he fears his identity might be exposed. Woo-jin asks about the person's academic background. Taehyun questions why that is relevant and mentions hearing that he has a master's degree. Woo-jin assumes that the higher one's education, the more they rely on logical evidence. Woo-jin asks if Taehyun mentioned that there was an eyewitness. He denies it and mentions that Woo-jin only saw from a distance. Woo-jin says he thinks that Man will confess if Taehyun says there's an eyewitness and assures him that he believes this person is the culprit. He asks if he can go now. Taehyun replies sure and again asks if Woo-jin thinks he's the culprit. He confirms it and tells him to take care. Taehyun inquires if he wants to walk him out. Woo-jin replies that he's fine. As Woo-jin leaves, he begins to consider his idea and opens the door of the interrogation room, informing Young-bae that they have an eyewitness who saw his face at the scene. Young-bae is surprised to hear that, and when they ask if he admits it now, he replies that it was impulsive and he didn't plan to kill from the start. The rain had stopped and the sky had cleared. Woo-jin stepped out, gazing up at the sky. He looks back at the police station, where some men were eating, and he wonders what jjajangmyeon tastes like at the police station. As drool forms on his mouth, he decides he will definitely try it someday. As Woo-jin starts heading home, he takes out his phone and checks Hiram's chat. He starts typing and texts her. "The culprit's caught, you can relax now." She silently checks the message on her phone while sitting in her classroom, surrounded by her friends. She texts him back asking, "But why are you contacting me only now?" She becomes totally confused when he tells her to get home safely. She can't believe it when he texts. Everyone just reads and ignores messages normally. She asks, what is he doing now? He replies, "I'm going to take on a challenge." She becomes even more confused, so he suggests, "If you come, it might increase my chances of success." Somewhere in a noodle restaurant, Hiram questions Woo-jin about their previous chat conversation. The shop owner brings the food to the table and tells Woo-jin that he has to finish it all within 20 minutes. He warns that if he fails to finish, he will have to pay 20,000 won as a penalty. Woo-jin readies himself, realizing that the key factor to watch out for is the leptin hormone. When eating, fat cells release leptin, signaling fullness and satiety to the brain, so he must finish before leptin induces the sensation of fullness. The shop owner takes out a stopwatch and tells Woo-jin to let him know when he is ready. Woo-jin says he is ready, and the shop owner sets the stopwatch to 20 minutes, then urges him to begin. He dips his chopsticks into the bowl of noodles and pulls out a large portion at once. He quickly eats them and then grabs a huge piece of meat, shocking both the shop owner and Hiram. Woo-jin desperately tries to fit it into his mouth, swallowing it whole, then moves on to finish the remaining noodles in the bowl. He lifts the bowl filled with soup and in one swift motion, tosses it into the air. He opens his mouth, gulping down every drop, and the table gets pushed away as his belly expands. Woo-jin puts down the empty bowl and taps the stopwatch himself while both of them stare at him in surprise. Then the shop owner says he has succeeded, and Woo-jin exclaims that he should ask Bomi to praise him. Confused, Hiram asks if he is trying to become a YouTuber or something. He refuses, saying that's not normal, and Hiram challenges him, asking if eating all that is normal. As they leave, they express their gratitude for the meal, and the shop owner thanks them in return, encouraging them to visit again. Hiram questions him, asking if there's really room for a latte. He says it's a rule to have dessert after a meal when someone is with a woman. She asks if he knows he's really weird but strangely interesting. He asks back, "Isn't this normal?" She urges him to come quickly as they head to a coffee shop. Woo-jin tries a drink and exclaims, "It's so sweet." Hiram warns him that he needs to stop watching YouTube, saying his way of speaking is unusual. But he keeps eating the pastry, exclaiming, "It's so delicious," making Hiram more worried. A moment later, someone opens the car door as Hiram warns Woo-jin that he really needs to stop watching YouTube. She urges him to get in, assuring him that she'll give him a ride and that it's fine. But Woo-jin simply stands there as she gets into the car. As it starts moving, she glances at him, finding it strange. Then a smile appears on her lips as she adds that it is also peculiar. On the other side, in Woo-jin's house, he was watching food videos on YouTube when suddenly an unknown number called him. Woo-jin wondered if he had won something at this hour. As he picked up the call, the caller inquired, "Is this Shin Woo-jin's phone?" He confirmed it and asked, "Who is this?" Then Woo-jin realized that Taehyun was calling him. Taehyun asked if it was a good time to talk, then brought up the YouTube channel High School Mukbang. He explained that there wasn't just one perpetrator, but several. The victim and the perpetrators had met in a runaway family, and the victim's family hadn't searched for them much. Woo-jin realized the victim had turned 20 after repeatedly running away. Even if they appeared on YouTube while being held captive, no one would suspect anything or say a word, and the runaway family had likely committed the crime with that in mind. Taehyun said he had saved someone's life and wondered how Woo-jin knew about it. Woo-jin then asked if the victim had made it home safely. As Taehyun confirmed it, he thanked Woo-jin, saying they were able to solve the case because of him. He added that he wanted to treat him to a meal as a token of appreciation and asked when he would be available. Woo-jin realized an opportunity had been created as planned and asked, "Is it okay if we have meat instead of a regular meal?" Taehyun replied, "Sure, that's fine," and asked, "What would you like to eat?" Woo-jin requested, "Two-horned Hanwoo number 9. Taehyun becomes puzzled by Woo-jin's unusual request. Woo-jin explains that it's Hanwoo A++ grade number 9 Salkaisel. Taehyun had never heard of number 9 before, but since Woo-jin had done something remarkable, he agrees. Woo-jin asks when he should meet him, and Taehyun suggests, "What about this Saturday?" Woo-jin agrees, assuring him that he will keep his schedule clear. A few days later, Woo-jin steps out of the metro station, excitedly thinking, finally, today is the day he gets to eat Hanwoo Two-horn number 9. Then 2 people call out to him. As Woo-jin turns around, they ask if they can speak with him. The girl says it's just that he seems to have a lot of good fortune on his face. Confused, Woo-jin asks if they are talking about fortune. She confirms it, saying that's why she couldn't just pass by. Woo-jin questions if she means luck or good fortune. She confirms it and tells him they are students and that his energy is so bright. Woo-jin thinks there are many types of study, and learning is lifelong. He asks, what kind of study? She explains that they primarily study the principles of all things. Woo-jin asks if that can be considered a form of science or something similar to physics. They both look confused, and she denies it. She then asks if he is familiar with the saying, "Mountains are mountains, water is water," emphasizing that people don't perceive these things as they naturally are, but instead assign meaning to them. Woo-jin replies that a mountain is defined as a place where trees cluster at high altitudes, and water is chemically identified as H2O. He asks them if there is any error in his knowledge. She replies, as expected, his energy is bright. The boy says, perhaps he must often hear that he is handsome. When that man nervously adds that his ancestor is currently sitting on his shoulder and looks very similar to him, Woo-jin starts looking around. They mention that he hasn't been very devout. Surprised, Woo-jin asks if they can see ghosts. That man becomes completely speechless, and the girl tells him they don't call them ghosts but ancestral spirits. Woo-jin takes out his phone, displaying the structure of an eye, and asks how they interpret such non-organic entities. They become horrified as he continues, asking if they possess a unique organ different from others. He mentions evolution and mutation, or asks if they perceive energy wavelengths. The boy tells her he has a bad feeling that something might go wrong if they bring this person with them. She asks Woo-jin if they can meet again another time since something urgent just came up. Woo-jin silently begins to observe her every detail and says he is not a scary person. They make the excuse that something urgent came up and that he is not a scary person. Woo-jin, curious, urges them to talk more about ancestral spirits, but they quickly start running away from him, leaving confused Woo-jin standing alone. Someone was recording him and couldn't hold his laughter. When he laughs out loud, saying, "That's hilarious," Woo-jin notes that man. He introduces himself as Kirat TV, active on YouTube. He explains that many people fall for scams, so he was recording just in case to have evidence. But he has never seen anyone react like this before, so he asks for permission to use it for a YouTube video. Woo-jin denies it, saying that's not ordinary. He tells him he will blur his face. But Woo-jin disagrees and requests him to please delete the video. As Woo-jin starts leaving, that man suggests changing his voice and assures him that no one will recognize him. But Woo-jin again requests him to please delete it, and that man offers $500,000 won. Woo-jin again requests him to delete the video, but that man increases the offer by 1 million won. Suddenly, Woo-jin takes out his phone, showing his bank account details. That man begins typing his account number and asks, how can he change his attitude so quickly? Woo-jin receives a message confirming that 1 million won has been deposited into his account. After some time in a restaurant, Woo-jin is with Taehyun, who asks what he said he wanted to eat. Woo-jin replies, Two-horn number 9 Salkaisel. When Taehyun sees the price on the menu board, his hand begins to shake, and Woo-jin says something else is fine too. Hiram disagrees and insists that he claimed he would treat him. As the waitress notes it down, Taehyun tremblingly orders 3 portions. Then he laughs and thanks Woo-jin, saying that if they had been a little late, it could have been disastrous. When they arrived at the scene, it was chaos, and people were on the verge of tearing off the screen and jumping out. As the waitress begins serving their dishes, Woo-jin exclaims, "That's fortunate." Taehyun says he was so flustered he forgot to ask, and then asks Woo-jin how he has been and if he is doing okay. Woo-jin replies that he is trying to live ordinarily, which confuses Taehyun. Then, recalling all his past interactions with Woo-jin, he assumes Woo-jin is studying crime due to trauma from the incident. As the waitress finally serves the meat, they are both amazed by its appearance. Drool begins to drip from Woo-jin's mouth as the waitress grills the food and tells them to try it first with just salt. Woo-jin picks up a piece with his chopsticks, puts it in his mouth, and is surprised by its amazing taste. Taehyun, confused by his reaction, asks if he bit his tongue. Then he takes a bite of the meat himself, and is shocked by its incredible flavor. He exclaims that this is worth the price, and that the meat juice is just melting in his mouth. He tells Woo-jin to snap out of it, and jokingly asks if he should eat it all. Woo-jin quickly demands one more piece, and they both begin enjoying the meal together. Taehyun says that if the meat isn't enough, they can order more. A few days later, Woo-jin studies on his computer and occasionally enjoys snacks with his family. Bomi personally helps him with his studies, and he also hangs out with Hiram. They go out to eat at different places and study together in the library. Sometime later, Woo-jin's exams arrive. He attends his classes, and as winter approaches, the snow begins to fall. Finally, winter arrives, and Woo-jin goes to take his final exam. He sits with the others as they begin handing out the question sheets. Woo-jin looks down at his sheet and decides to get started. After the students started coming out of the exam, Woo-jin was among them, anxious because he had made an irreversible mistake. He quietly watched as other parents praised their children and imagined his own parents who only wanted him to stay healthy even if he didn't excel in his studies. He reaffirmed that living an ordinary life was the best choice. Looking up at the sky, he wondered what he should say when he got home. Sometime later, he slowly pushed open the front door of their house. As he stepped inside, Bomi noticed him and asked how the test went, but he didn't respond. Noticing his somber expression, she grew concerned. As Woo-jin started walking away, Bomi wondered if he had messed up the CSAT. She recalled the moments when he was preparing and found it hard to believe that he could have failed the test. Concerned, Bomi asks if something bad happened. Looking down, Woo-jin replies that he may have overestimated himself. She wonders if he really messed up the test due to nerves. She reassures him, saying there will be other opportunities and no one will blame him. Woo-jin tells her he's going to wash up, and she watches as he heads to his room. He sets his jacket on the bed while changing his clothes. After coming out, he notices a message from Hiram asking about his test. But he places his phone down without replying, troubled by the thought that he might have wasted time solving too many unnecessary practice problems. He steps out of his room, and Bomi watches as he slowly walks through the hall and enters the bathroom. She has never seen Woo-jin like this before. She starts calling someone, wondering how she can comfort him. Her mom picks up and asks if Woo-jin is home. She tells Bomi to ask him what else he wants to eat besides bulgogi. Bomi lowers her voice and whispers that it seems Woo-jin didn't do as well as he expected, and he looks really down. Her dad asks if Woo-jin is home. She explains that he seems upset because he didn't perform well on the test. He insists on talking to Woo-jin and asks Bomi if he admitted to messing up badly. She responds that judging by his face, he looks really disappointed. He tells her to let Woo-jin know it's okay, and that these things happen, while Bomi's mom nods in agreement. As Woo-jin comes out of the washroom, Bomi, still concerned, asks if it's because he got too many questions wrong and reassures him that mom and dad still love him. He tells her it wasn't ordinary, leaving her confused. He explains that he thinks he got every answer right when he should have gotten a few wrong to seem normal. She is completely shocked as Woo-jin says that without realizing it, he solved everything correctly and only became aware of it after the test was over. When she heard that, her soul nearly left her body in shock. She asks him again to confirm, and he nods. She realizes that's why he was feeling down. Woo-jin wondered if it was because he had solved too many practice problems. His hand moved instinctively, like how he doesn't consciously think about moving his jaw when eating, and he solved it effortlessly, like breathing. Woo-jin looks down at his hands in horror, while Bomi was startled by his strange behavior. She quickly grabs his hands and warns him to never tell anyone about this. He realizes this isn't normal, and Bomi cursed that accursed ordinariness. She assumes he might have gotten a few wrong. She asks if he wrote down his answers to verify them. He denies it and mutters that he's doomed because he remembers all the answers. She becomes puzzled, wondering how anyone could possibly remember which answer corresponds to which number. Woo-jin innocently assures her that he remembers them, and Bomi finds it abnormal. Then she decides to check together and reassures him that he must have made a few mistakes. After that, Bomi opens the website and starts asking him the questions one by one. Woo-jin answers each one correctly, and Bomi finally realizes he truly memorized them all. While he is answering, he asks Bomi if she is paying attention, and she quickly confirms it. When he asks if there were any wrong ones, she reassures him that he might have made mistakes in other subjects and decides to verify them all first. While Bomi is reviewing every question paper, he hopes that at least one answer is incorrect. Bomi turns back and calls out his name, breaking the bad news by telling him not to be too disheartened. He realizes every single one is correct. But Bomi tells him this is something to celebrate. A worried Woo-jin denies it, sees this as unusual, and thinks that being ordinary is truly challenging after all. Bomi tries to reassure him, but Woo-jin is too disappointed in himself. At that moment, Bomi realizes Woo-jin's mindset operates on a completely different level. Woo-jin is still fixated on not being ordinary, which frustrates Bomi. Suddenly, the doorbell rings and Bomi quickly rushes to greet her parents. She discloses everything about Woo-jin's situation to them, making him feel even more dejected. Woo-jin also steps out of his room, and they are confused because of what she had mentioned earlier. His dad notices him and acknowledges the perfect score. He drops the shopping bags, realizing exactly who Woo-jin takes after as everything clicks into place. He quickly embraces Woo-jin, proudly saying he takes after his father, but his mom immediately refutes it, insisting he takes after her. And Bomi asks them, what about her? After that, his dad decides that everyone should gather tomorrow and begins bragging to his relatives about Woo-jin's achievement, claiming that Woo-jin is just as intelligent as him. But his wife insists that Woo-jin inherited her intellect. However, it makes Woo-jin even more depressed that they're spreading the word about how he is not ordinary. His dad asks if he realizes that he could become a doctor, a prosecutor, or a lawyer. He also suggests that a real estate appraiser would be a good choice, or perhaps an accountant or tax consultant. Angrily, she slaps his back, frustrated that he is putting so much pressure on Woo-jin. She asks Woo-jin which university he plans to attend. He responds, an ordinary university, completely baffling everyone. His dad becomes anxious, realizing Woo-jin genuinely wants to go to an ordinary university. Then Bomi asks what major he will choose, but Woo-jin hasn't decided yet. He recalls his dad suggesting careers like accounting or tax consulting and starts researching them online. He notices a pattern in the jobs his dad mentioned. They all follow a structured system called the law. After searching further, he realizes S University appears to be the most common. Then he wonders, can he consider S University the most ordinary? Suddenly, he steps out of his room and tells his parents he has decided to attend S University like an ordinary person, leaving them completely dumbfounded that he considers S University ordinary. His dad quickly agrees, deciding that Woo-jin will aim for an ordinary university. After his college scholastic ability test score report is released, time flies by, and February finally arrives. Outside, snow blankets the ground as a train speeds along the tracks, with Woo-jin sitting inside. He takes out an egg and a soda, having always wanted to try this combination. He cracks the egg against his head and starts peeling off the shell. He takes a small bite of the egg before sipping the soda. He becomes captivated by the taste and realizes how amazing the combination is. After some time, he steps off the high-speed train and boards a nearby bus. After traveling for a while, the bus finally stops near a bus stop, and Woo-jin gets off. He begins walking towards a building in the distance. There, he signs some documents in front of a man, who then guides him to a room. The man unlocks the door for him, and Woo-jin finds himself standing before a glass window that separates the room into two sections. Woo-jin starts recalling his kidnapper and everything the man had done to him. At that moment, the same man appears on the other side of the room, and Woo-jin carefully observes him. The kidnapper looks bewildered upon seeing Woo-jin standing across from him. He quickly settles into his chair. The kidnapper mocks Woo-jin, saying that since he can't hear, he probably doesn't understand. But knowing that Woo-jin can read lips, he starts furiously cursing at him. He accuses Woo-jin of murdering his family and grows increasingly violent, prompting the officer to immediately order him to step back. Woo-jin no longer feels fear or any emotion toward this man, as he is now completely free, and he intends to confirm it. Woo-jin asks if he is afraid of him now that the tables have turned. But the man stubbornly insists that Woo-jin is the murderer who killed his sister-in-law, arguing that she had no interest in herbs whatsoever. Woo-jin recalls that she used to beat him mercilessly with a stick and coldly remarks that the prison uniform suits him perfectly. He calls him Inmate 2038 and points out how much his voice is trembling. The kidnapper becomes even more aggressive and starts slamming his fists against the glass window. Woo-jin thinks that people only see what they want to see and believe what they want to believe. The officer orders him to let go of his hand, and Woo-jin adds that people also seek validation for their own beliefs. He reminds him that two of his acquaintances also used to beat him regularly, but both died of heart attacks. Woo-jin realizes that the man is trying to shut him out as his increasing heart rate causes blood to pool in his chest. He wonders if he should push just a little further. Woo-jin tells him he's been worried lately and suggests engraving prisoner 2038's release date into his body, so the man doesn't forget. The kidnapper asks if Woo-jin is threatening him. Woo-jin replies, of course not. He's just concerned about his health. He then asks if the kidnapper is writing an autobiography, admitting he's curious about its contents. The kidnapper, shocked, can't believe Woo-jin even knew about it. For the sake of his health, Woo-jin warns him not to eat until he's completely full and advises him to set down his utensils before feeling fully satisfied. He suggests avoiding excessive exercise and limiting sun exposure as much as possible. Woo-jin urges him to focus entirely on his health. He then mentions that he has deposited some money into the kidnapper's prison account, but admits he doesn't have much since he hasn't found a job yet. Still, he promises to keep adding to it whenever he can. With a chilling tone, he explains that these deposits are a strategy, a way to ensure he stays on his mind at all times. The kidnapper begins to lose his balance and suddenly falls from his chair. The kidnapper starts accusing him again, but Woo-jin now sees him as nothing more than another dull person. As the officer drags him away, Woo-jin thinks that, despite everything, he's still a fascinating one nonetheless. As Woo-jin steps out of the building, he notices a couple talking and realizes that snow has begun to fall. He thinks that depending on one's circumstances, it can bring joy or cause stress for others. That was why one's environment is so important to a person. Even on such a cold day, Woo-jin realizes that it is impossible to take away people's warmth. On the other side, Bomi is walking with her friends. Woo-jin notices her while on a call and asks Bomi where she's going. She was just about to head home and asks him where he is. He glances at them and says he's right in front of her. She hesitates for a moment, puzzled, but her confusion quickly turns to shock as she sees Woo-jin waving at her just a few steps away. She quickly starts running with a bright smile. It might be slippery. She's running toward him without even looking at the ground. This was why one's environment is so important to a person. So he wonders, is he enjoying this current environment, or is he truly happy in it? She asks where he is coming from. He replies that he went to see someone he knows. While they were talking, Bomi's friends were stunned by Woo-jin's appearance. He begins to search his bag and takes out a box, offering it to Bomi, but she looks confused. So Woo-jin explains that it's takoyaki, a delicious snack, and it's wrapped to keep it warm. After some time passes, Woo-jin steps off a bus and heads towards the university. As he walks through the entrance in silence, his eyes suddenly catch a poster about a stock market simulation. But he believes there's no such thing as a free lunch. After entering the building, he stands in the lecture hall and scans the room. As he takes a seat in the middle, thinking nothing of it, someone greets him. The person recognizes Woo-jin and introduces himself as Wook. At first, Woo-jin is puzzled, but he quickly remembers that Wook is a member of the freshman chat. Woo-jin greets him back and suggests they get along without any trouble. Wook agrees but finds it strange that Woo-jin sounds so formal, almost like a textbook. He then asks if Woo-jin knows about the gathering after class, and Woo-jin confirms he does. Wook glances around and realizes that everyone has already arrived. Woo-jin feels a sense of excitement for his first college lecture. The professor starts walking toward the podium and introduces himself to everyone while Woo-jin listens attentively. He asks the students what they believe business is and encourages them to raise their hands and share. As the room falls silent, Woo-jin considers that raising his hand wouldn't be typical. The professor then says, "How about the student in the blue shirt?" That boy nervously asks, "Isn't it about leading a company?" He then asks, "What do you think, student in the white shirt?" That boy responds that he thinks it's about managing and operating a business. The professor acknowledges that's correct as well. Then he asks the student in the back what a business person should excel at. She replies that they should be skilled in planning and giving directions. The professor then asks, "How about the student next to them?" Woo-jin wonders if he was called on because he was sitting too close to the center. Since he has been chosen, he decides to answer and says he believes they should master persuasion. The puzzled professor asks what he means by that. Woo-jin explains that he noticed a securities company hosting a stock market simulation competition. People imagine the prize money and feel motivated to participate, but conversely, this can be seen as a form of enticement designed by the securities company. It's a strategy to identify individuals who have a natural talent for stocks from the beginning. If someone secures first or second place, the securities company can support them with the intent of recruiting them later. They establish a connection with the top winners through scholarships and other incentives. Wook is utterly shocked as Woo-jin elaborates that when people see advertisements, their minds enter a state of mild hypnosis. Business professionals leverage this effectively, influencing people to buy, gift, or crave something. Everyone watches him in astonishment as he continues, explaining that this is referred to as marketing, but from a macro perspective, and the hall falls into complete silence at his explanation. Suddenly, he calls out to the professor and asks when they will begin the actual lesson. He just wanted to attend a regular lecture soon. Shocked, everyone stares at him since he has practically covered everything already. The professor praises his answer, calling it excellent, and the entire class starts cheering as he earns a perfect score. Poor Woo-jin realizes that acting normal is harder than he thought and decides to try even harder. The professor begins the first class and thoroughly explains the introduction to business administration. As Woo-jin listens, he quickly realizes he already knows all of it and has seen it before, completely shattering his expectations. Suddenly, his eyes widen while a puzzled girl watches him. Woo-jin wonders if the professor noticed that he wasn't paying as much attention as the other students and decides he really can't let his guard down. After some time, the lecture ends and the students start leaving. Finally, it is time for Woo-jin to try the legendary campus meal. Woo-jin quickly rushes out and finds a hidden spot to eat. He scans the cafeteria, selects his meal from a digital screen, and sits at a table. As he eats, he notices everyone watching him. After finishing his food, he thinks it lacks message, which is safer than salt. Suddenly, a message pops up on his phone. It's Taehyun asking if Woo-jin is busy. Woo-jin replies that he just finished his meal and is busy. Taehyun calls him, and Woo-jin answers. Taehyun mentions that he has a challenging case this time and offers 100,000 won. Over time, Woo-jin has assisted Detective Kim Taehyun in solving several cases. Each time, Detective Kim Taehyun would either treat him to a good meal or give him money. It was an easy way for Woo-jin to earn money. Woo-jin urges him to send the details over, but Taehyun suggests they discuss it in person. Suddenly, Woo-jin notices an announcement stating that the lecture has been cancelled. He tells Taehyun he is free now and asks where he should go, but Taehyun insists on picking him up. After some time, Taehyun waits near his car, and Woo-jin finally arrives. Taehyun remarks that Woo-jin looks even better now that he is a college student. Woo-jin asks what kind of case it is, but Taehyun suggests they discuss it inside the car. They get in, close the doors, and Taehyun rummages through his bag, telling Woo-jin to hold on a moment. But Woo-jin insists that instead of just watching videos or looking at pictures, they should visit the scene. Taehyun looks puzzled, so Woo-jin explains that people learn through experience. That's why the more experience someone gains, the more useful it becomes. He just wants to experience it firsthand. Since Woo-jin was urging him, Taehyun shifts gears and steps on the accelerator, choosing to move forward. They arrive at a building and head to the 3rd floor, where they find a man stationed outside the room where the crime occurred. Taehyun expresses his gratitude for his hard work. He responds that it's no problem. As he removes the tape from the door, Taehyun asks Woo-jin if he's really okay with this, and he assures him he is. They're standing in the kitchen where the murder took place. Woo-jin quickly scans his surroundings and envisions a yellow-haired man knocking on the door while holding a black package. The victim opens the door for him, but looks confused as the yellow-haired man suddenly shuts the door behind him and lunges at him with a knife. He successfully slashes the victim's neck and swiftly pulls the knife out of the wound, splattering blood on the wall. But the victim is still alive, so the attacker strikes again. He slowly collapses in front of him, desperately trying to crawl away. However, the attacker quickly grabs his neck and starts suffocating him. The victim's eyes roll back in agony, and he dies on the spot. Woo-jin realizes the throat was the primary target. He mentions that the victim suffered severe blood loss from a stab wound on the right side of the neck, and that the weapon used was a knife. He adds that it wasn't a kitchen knife, and that the crime wasn't impulsive but premeditated, given that the perpetrator's intent was murder. Taehyun had expected Woo-jin to deduce everything just by examining the scene. He asks if he discovered anything else. Taehyun responds, "Nothing so far," and pulls out the suspect's CCTV footage. As Woo-jin watches the video, he inquires about fingerprints. Taehyun states that there were none. Suddenly, Woo-jin is taken aback and pauses the video, realizing that the suspect knew the victim. The suspect was a male, approximately 180 centimeters tall, with blonde hair, no fingerprints, and carrying a plastic bag containing a soju bottle. Taehyun confirms it. Woo-jin asks if the suspect was apprehended, but he doesn't believe he's the real culprit. Taehyun confirms that this person was apprehended. But Taehyun questions why Woo-jin thinks that, given that all circumstantial evidence points to this suspect as the culprit. Woo-jin asks if he truly believes that, then why did he call him in? Taehyun explains that the suspect refuses to confess no matter what, and something feels off. Woo-jin considers that his alibi is questionable. Taehyun states that the suspect claims he didn't go home that night and stayed at a motel. Conveniently, the motel's CCTV was malfunctioning. The motel owner was also intoxicated and doesn't even recall which room the suspect stayed in. Woo-jin notices in the video that they had retrieved a strand of hair from the crime scene. Woo-jin asks if he is aware that the murder weapon appears to be a long, sharp knife, similar to a sashimi knife. If Woo-jin is merely describing what he observes, then assuming the culprit is proficient with a sashimi knife provides clarity. Criminals tend to use tools they are accustomed to, believing that familiarity minimizes unexpected variables. And if they assume the perpetrator works in a profession involving water, it would explain why no fingerprints were found, despite ringing the doorbell with bare hands, which makes sense to Taehyun. Woo-jin agrees, pointing out that people who frequently work with water often develop severe eczema, which can erase fingerprints. He brings up the hair found at the crime scene. It could be animal fur, belong to someone entirely different, or even be synthetic. Taehyun is puzzled, so Woo-jin clarifies that the culprit wore a wig. Taehyun then realizes that Woo-jin is suggesting the suspect disguise themselves before committing the murder. More precisely, he adds that they manipulated the situation rather than merely causing confusion and urges him to take a closer look. If he examines the suspect's footprints, he will notice that most of the weight is on the heels, which is why the front part of the footprint is faint. When attacking someone, most of the weight is typically placed on the toes. He explains that they intentionally wore shoes that were too large, creating extra space at the front, which caused the toe area of the footprint to appear faint. Additionally, he points out something unusual. The side of the shoe is imprinted here. Taehyun suggests that maybe they stumbled during a struggle. Woo-jin dismisses the idea, stating that they killed the victim instantly. Even if a struggle had occurred, if their foot had twisted at this angle, at the very least, their ligaments would have been strained, and a fracture would have been highly likely. He speculates that they might have worn insoles. He then shows Taehyun the video, highlighting that the suspect is walking away without any signs of limping. Even with extremely high adrenaline levels, this shouldn't be possible. Now he urges Taehyun to examine the hair strand again, which has shifted slightly compared to when they first entered. He points out that hair doesn't grow asymmetrically within a few minutes. Structurally speaking, that's impossible. Then Taehyun realizes they deliberately wore oversized shoes and a wig. Woo-jin says the real culprit had to take care of both the victim and the suspect who's currently in custody. He assumes they needed to handle both around the same time, since the victim was likely seen as an easy target. But the suspect in custody is taller and more muscular. They probably thought he wouldn't be as easy to eliminate. The suspect in custody is 184 centimeters tall. At the time of arrest, his hair was black, and adds the police likely found the sudden change in hair color suspicious. He realizes his mistake. At that moment, he had gotten a bit carried away. Woo-jin estimates that the real culprit's actual shoe size is between 255 to 260 millimeters. They had a personal connection with the victim and a strong motive to frame the suspect, intending to eliminate both at once. Woo-jin wonders what reason they had for disguising themselves, framing one person and killing the other. He considers the possible motives: money, revenge, or a woman. His conclusion is that the culprit is highly skilled with sashimi knives. They also likely suffer from chronic eczema, which has erased their fingerprint patterns. They probably have at least a college degree, as lower education levels tend to be associated with impulsive crimes. But the higher the education level, the more systematic and premeditated the crime tends to be. Taehyun calls Jikyol and asks if he has found anything. Jikyol responds that it's not human hair, it's synthetic. This surprises him, as Woo-jin had correctly predicted it. Statistically speaking, Woo-jin assumes this would place the culprit's height between 166 to 170 centimeters, and likely in their 30s. Taehyun recalls interrogating a man who was cooking and quickly calls Jikyol, reminding him to track down the one who works at that sushi restaurant. After some time passes, Woo-jin is walking back to university when Taehyun calls to thank him, jokingly saying he really loves him. Woo-jin isn't interested but accepts the 100,000 won and asks what the motive was. Taehyun explains that the culprit had borrowed money from both victims and killed them because they were spreading rumors about him not paying it back. Behind Woo-jin, someone calls out to him. It's another student. Woo-jin quickly analyzes his facial features and realizes his name is Kim Man-soo. Judging by his wrinkles, Woo-jin assumes he is in his late 20s. Man-soo exclaims that Woo-jin was incredible back there. He felt like he was watching a professional lecture. Woo-jin decides to be more cautious. Man-soo then asks if he is joining the stock trading competition, mentioning that many students from their department are participating. Woo-jin wonders if he should join as well. If he doesn't, wouldn't that make him stand out? He contemplates how he should approach it. The antlion's larvae, also known as doodlebugs, the antlion preys on ants, sucking out their bodily fluids and discarding their empty shells. But this behavior isn't exclusive to insects. As a stock's value rises, people rush to buy it, hoping to make more money. But in the end, they lose their investments due to greed. Overwhelmed by frustration and despair, some even attempt to take their own lives. Even in the stock market, those referred to as ants have their money drained. If most ordinary people are ants, Woo-jin thinks he should be one too. But he reminds himself that if he loses money, mom, dad, and Bomi will be devastated. So instead of being the one drained, he decides to be the one doing the draining, just like extracting honey, since self-rationalization is simply part of human nature.